Hello and welcome. I'm Christiana, Exhibition Manager for Chemspec Europe. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Charlotte Wiles of Chemtrix as our next speaker at Chemspec Digital. She'll be presenting continuous primary processing from R&D concept to implementation at industrial scale. Dr. Charlotte Wiles will be taking some questions at the end of the session. So I invite you to write your questions into the chat box and I will read them out at the end. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Christiane. So as you've just heard, we're going to be looking today at the use of continuous flow technology, particularly in the primary end of the reaction development process. And I'm going to talk to you about how we've used this going from an R&D perspective all the way through to industrial implementation. We also have a second presentation tomorrow, which will showcase small modular production plants and the flexibility associated with those and the opportunity it brings to outsourcing and reshoring of chemicals. But today, what we want to look at is how the technology is used to firstly develop a process, what the opportunities can be, and how you look to go from lab through to manufacturing. So a little background to us, we're a continuous flow reactor company and we specialize in hardware that goes from lab through to production. And depending on whether you're in a fine chemical or a pharmaceutical sector, the scales with which you work at lab, pilot and production obviously change, but the technology itself remains the same. So we're looking at intensifying processes, looking for opportunities of process improvement. And we're not looking to go batch to flow with processes that are happily running in batch, but we're looking for those opportunities where you have a control problem, a selectivity issue, an issue with scaling. And that's where we would tend to use our application platform. And this is a cooperative technique. So there's a whole group of people around us partnering from universities to system integrators, software companies. And together we realize this transition of R&D in flow through to manufacturing that I'll show you today. So what we're principally doing is we're trying to overcome the scalability influence that you have in batch. So when you get a gram process that works and you just about get it to work at 100 grams, but then it falls over and starts to fail at a kilo. We're looking at those processes that lose selectivity, have losses in yield as you scale, or even fail due to lack of thermal control or safety infrastructure. And the flow reactor itself is a mechanism of minimizing those changes as you scale from small to pilot to production. And we look at controlling surface to volume ratio, and as a result, giving you thermal control and a high degree of mixing efficiency in your device. And the idea with this concept is that you reduce your scale-up risks, you intensify your process, you use the equipment as a heat transfer agent rather than your fluid and your diluting solvent. And this gives you a smaller footprint, like you can see on the right-hand side, a small RTR unit from AM Technology next to a conventional batch vessel that it would replace. And the idea here is your product quality remains consistent and high, and you use advanced process control to control your process, rather than a filling, reacting and emptying strategy that you would typically do with your batch process. So the production approach with a flow reactor is different to sizing a batch vessel. You basically leave it running continuously in order to deliver material. So what you're looking at is a small production unit that is running at a few tens of mil, few liters per minute, and you leave it running for a month, a year to generate the amount of material. And this was a saying that Dave Vega of DSM used to advocate: you just leave the tap running. If you need double the material, run it for double the time. So conceptually, we look at designing a process that can give you the right product quality, the right safety level, and then you decide what size that needs to be in order to achieve the production rate that you're looking for. So there's many different types of flow reactors out there, static, dynamic, but at the heart of all of them, you have your dosing system where you're controlling your reagent inputs. You have your method of mixing and temperature control, and then you collect your reaction product. You can telescope multiple of these together to do many transformations. But if you think of the whole process as this simple, bringing material together in a controlled way, mixing in a defined way, and controlling the temperature. That's the ethos behind developing a flow process. And you're essentially looking at making sure that your process requirements are known and you design the equipment to match what your process needs, as opposed to what we often do in batch, which is we change our process to suit the vessel that we have. And we'll often dilute and add slower because it works for the vessel type that we have in hand. So as a reactor company, you'd expect me to say that the flow reactor is the most important part of a continuous process. It's not, it's the dosing system. If you don't have controlled reagent input, you'll not get a stable and consistent period in your reactor, and your product quality will vary. So we put a lot of energy to working with partners to have good dosing, keeping the reagents very smooth flow, working at pressure, and delivering at the stoichiometry that's required to have the selectivity that you need for your process. So start with a good dosing system. In some cases, don't even use a pump, you can use a pressure vessel, but the stability and the consistency is the important thing there. We then look at going into the reactor itself. Here's an example of a plate reactor. This is one of ours. You can see thermally controlled using a recirculator. And the idea here is that you are continuously looping your thermal fluid at a high flow through your device. And this gives you a narrow temperature window when you're actually performing your reaction. So as a result, you'll find in flow that you don't have the large temperature deltas that you have in a batch process, where you may choose to have a -20 vessel for something you want to maintain at 10 degrees or 0. Here you would run it at -20 if you wanted to hold the reaction to -20. So we have a narrower temperature differential, which can also help the selectivity of your process. You need a lot of analytical tools within your flow reactor. This could be anything from a pressure sensor, temperature sensor, conductivity, all the way up to PAT tools like infrared, Raman, UPLC. And the reason for this is your reaction time is going to be much shorter than a batch process. So you don't rely on offline qualification of your product. So you'll be continually monitoring the product quality as you collect it. And this takes you towards a real-time release ethos that the FDA are particularly interested in looking at. So what you want to make sure is that if you've got a reaction time of 5 seconds, you've got an analytical method that can tell you you're operating within quality within that time frame, so that you don't run the risk of collecting low quality material. If you see a process disturbance, then of course you would go into diversion mode, send your material to a whole vessel whilst you bring the process back online, and afterwards switch back to collection. And you should not just look at the reactor. So here you can see liquid-liquid separators. We're really interested in debottlenecking chemical production. So if you've improved your process, also look to your downstream, be it crystallization, liquid-liquid extractions. So we would also look downstream for opportunities to improve the sustainability and the efficiency of a process. So there are all the elements. The next thing is to bring it all together into a system. I've got an example here from Fluid, who are also exhibiting within the event, and you can go visit them to learn more. You can see we're in a walk-in fume cupboard. On the left, you've got a dosing skid, your feed vessels. In the center, reactors, thermal control, and then towards the right, your product collection. So once you've done your development work and identified which aspects are important for your process, you then work with an engineering company to deliver a total solution. This could be in an ATEX environment, it could be fully automated or manual, and that's what you need to work out when you're doing your development, going from R&D through to manufacturing. What are the important criteria for your particular process, and design appropriately. So significant aspects of flow is the control that you get as a result of bringing the scale of the reactor down. So you'll find a lot in the literature of people looking at fast reactions, highly energetic, unstable intermediates, but there's other benefits such as the high containment. We've got some high potency compounds that we'll show you later. And by having a continuous reactor, you're minimizing exposure to the operator when performing these chemistries. We can work with hazardous materials that are enclosed within a headspaceless environment, and you can accelerate the way you go from R&D through to piloting and manufacturing by leaving your initial device running for longer to get your first early clinical batches or development batches, for example. So what you have to look at when you're thinking about using the technology is, do you have a process that is changing as you go from a small scale to a larger scale? Are you losing control over the product quality or actually the physical parameters of the process? And we're looking to address priority areas in the industry, such as reduction in energy use and cost, reduced waste generation, increased reaction efficiency and process safety. So at the heart of everything we do, the product is key, the material that you're wanting to produce, and we're looking at how to do that in the cleanest, safest, most environmentally friendly way. So how we do this is a mix of practical work and theoretical evaluation. So we always start with a theoretical look at the process, and not just the chemical process, but actually the problem statement that comes from the end user. So deciding to go flow is really nice, but why are you doing it? What are you trying to solve? And what are your theoretical benefits by making this switch? So we work, before doing any practical work, really closely with our end users and our partners to identify what's important to the chemistry, but also important to the process, and how we can see that this could get implemented within that company. If we can see theoretical opportunities for that process, we'd then go on to basic feasibility work. And this would be practical experimentation, proof of concept, and with some small lab trials, looking at whether or not it's a yes, no, maybe for the technology. And if that looks good, we then move on to optimization of the parameters in detail. This will allow us to evaluate the suitable hardware in order to reach the goal of the kilos, the multi-metric ton, depending on what the particular partner needs. And this is when you'd also define the process parameters that you want to be using to engage an engineering company to build such a piece of equipment for you. And a not to be underestimated part of the program is also realizing this, designing the plant, building, testing, commissioning, and putting it online. So this is essentially the program of how we work and how we engage with people. And the theoretical evaluation and feasibility study comes more and more from the end user already having that input by doing work themselves in their own lab. But we can start at any point between these 4 stages in order to engage a new process. So our first step from a chemical perspective is to look at whether or not we can perform the chemistry continuously. And to do that, we would use our small screening platform using these little glass devices that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. And we work at this scale because it really quickly lets us tune temperature, pressure, stoichiometry, reagent use, solvents, without having any hazard profile. So we're in the nanogram, milligram level of a sample. So this allows us to really push and antagonize the chemistry and look to see how far we can intensify it. We end up working in a pressurized environment. So in this device, we have no headspace. And this allows us to work at elevated pressures, keep everything in solution, and you wouldn't be able to typically use acetonitrile at 100 degrees in a batch vessel, but you can really readily do that within this scale of device. And this allows us to look at the operating window that's available for the chemical development. So analytic-wise, we would look to the process, sometimes put an FTIR on the outlet of our devices so that we can be monitoring, as you see here, as we increase temperature, we get a loss of starting material and we get a rise in the product signal. And this allows us to really quickly qualify temperature and stoichiometry effects. And then more often we would use offline qualification to quantify, so that you're looking at the conversion of a starting material, quantifying how much product and side product you're forming. And we would then look at a data series of time, temperature, stoichiometry, and reagent type in order to come to the optimal condition for our process. So what you can see here is that you typically have a limit for an azidation up to 50, 60 degrees in your batch process. But in these small pressurized environments, we can go in a new operating window. We can work at a higher temperature, giving us a shorter reaction time. And we can look at cost of goods really easily by switching out the starting material. So before you get too far down the line, you're still at the 100 mg level, but you're able to look at what the impact of your choices are on your manufacturing process. We also look for opportunities in syntheses that are problematic in batch from a selectivity issue, where you need to be really quick with your reagent addition, or you need to use protecting groups to prevent side reactions. So here, together with Eurofins Alphora, they worked with us to take enginol through to the mebutate, typically multi-stage protect, acylate, deprotect, and release your product. But they found by doing this continuously, they had a direct route, skipping the protecting and deprotecting steps. So this is a really nice example where they're able to control selectivity and reactivity by giving such a short time frame within the device. There's a really nice patent on that work. So what this technology is not something just for pharma. You'll see a lot of the literature is about pharmaceutical production and API. But for us, we see much more work happening in specialty and fine chemical arenas. So scaling up reopening polymerizations where it's difficult to increase the scale of a process that typically runs in a glove box. Here, again, the headspace, the inert environment lets you look at different reaction times, temperatures, and control your polydispersity in a polymer formation. So it doesn't just have to be API chemistry. You can also look at molecules where you're looking for performance materials. That said, there are a number of advances in telescoping flow processes, which are typically happening in the pharma space. So here you can see a multi-step lomustine production route developed by Purdue. This is a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma treatment, and they're looking for a small production system that can generate the annual requirement of doses per country. And then you've got the opportunity of locating this equipment in multiple geographies so that you can deliver the targeted amount of material at site. So the telescoping here was important to realizing a new synthetic route and choosing raw materials that were accessible. And you can see more of this. I can send you the link after in a YouTube video. When you're looking in flow to go bigger, obviously you can't do everything in your milligram microreactors. We increase the scale of our devices. So in the back here, you can see a silicon carbide Protrix reactor. This is about 13 mil in volume. And we would use this for kilogram production. So once we've understood what levers there are to pull on the chemistry and what you can do to intensify the process, we would increase the scale of the reactor, but we would maintain the production time. We would maintain temperature, stoichiometry, mixing, and that would allow you within this device to obtain higher quantities of the raw material. So what you can see here is we're typically looking at chemistries that need control thermally or stoichiometrically. So here we were looking at a direct oxidation as a shorter synthetic route for a fine chemical. And the goal was to replace a multi-step chemistry with a direct oxidation via the Dakin reaction. The customer didn't want to use peroxide at scale because of the risk of having large vessels with an active oxidant in it. So that was the driver behind the continuous flow development. And in this particular case, we take the aldehyde in an aqueous hydroxide solution, and we control add within the flow reactor the peroxide. And this gives you a biphasic reaction mixture that is in essence your aqueous waste and your liquid organic catechol. Based on that, we also used a continuous phase separation device at the outlet of the reactor so that we could divert the aqueous waste to waste, and we could collect the organic product as a pure material. So that's a nice example of combining upstream and downstream technologies. From an aggressive chemistry perspective, we've also looked at high temperature, high caustic processes. Obviously, you can't use glass devices for this. So again, we choose the silicon carbide reactor. And we were looking at the possibility to switch out diethylene glycol as a reaction solvent in the Wolff-Kishner reaction to go for methanol, giving you an easier isolation of product and a more sustainable production process. We also wanted to bring the reaction time down and the excess of base present. So this was a piece of work together with CC Flow between AstraZeneca and Oliver Cappe's group in Graz. And we looked at the ability to reduce the amount of excess hydrazine to form the hydrazone and then bring the base down in order to do that reaction step. So what we can see here is that we're able to get a reaction time down from 2 hours to 20 minutes, but we're also able to increase the yield by having a more selective process and an easier isolation. So we're looking to target challenging exothermic chemistries where there can be a byproduct formed or there can be a polymerization event in this particular case. And we are looking to poor heat transfer performance of a batch vessel and to have the jacketed system taking that problem away. So here you can see we've got feed vessels, pumps, reactor on a thermal circuit, and we're going now through into the reactor to give you the measure of the product quality and product stability. And with a unit such as this size, which is about 70 mil, we're processing approximately 2 litres per hour of final material, giving you multi-ton capabilities from what is actually a walk-in fume cupboard. The modularity that we'll get into tomorrow in presentation is one of the key features of this flexible technology. You can see here for OmniChem, they've built various modules for dosing, reaction, and product collection. And working in this way gives you the ability to test each small module within the lab at what will actually be your production scale. And then almost like a little jigsaw puzzle, you put that together within your production environment and leave it running for continuous manufacturing. The particular reason behind this scale was to look at reducing time for an exothermic process dosing addition, high potency compound, and by putting 2 of the key exothermic steps into intensified continuous processes, they were able to convert 75% of their process from batch, and that has the knock-on impact of freeing up that batch capacity again. So the techniques are all about making sure that you can control each step independently. You've got speed of scale up and you get the product quality that you require that you're not able to get if you're working in your batch vessel. Batch-to-batch variation reduction is a big driver for mainly specialty, high purity and pharmaceutical environments, but also the ability to access quantities of material that were previously not accessible if you do develop something using a direct hazardous route such as a nitration. That the fact that you might not be able to get over a few metric tons in batch, this technology lets you operate in this case up to about 700 litres per hour. So it's all about maintaining your target specification, identifying where your bottleneck is, in this case, thermal control and corrosivity, and using the right device in order to achieve that. So small fast reactions such as diazotizations are also a really nice one. Here you can see we'd typically be having a couple of second reaction time and you'd isolate the diazonium intermediate, which is a hazardous task in itself. So we've found that by having a couple of 100 mil reactor, really low reaction time, we can produce a 200 metric ton, the coupled product, and this removes the need for isolation of your intermediates. So it's about looking at the problem. Do you have an issue with your isolation? Do you have an issue with your temperature control or your selectivity? And tuning the chemistry in the device accordingly. And in this final case, what you can see here is parallel operation for increasing productivity. So if you reach the maximum output of one device, then you put them in parallel and you increase your production rate. And what you can see from the graph here is from a sustainability perspective, going continuous, reduce the amount of solvent required for this process because the device acts as your heat sink, and you have a large opportunity for increasing not only the quality of product, but the sustainability of your production process itself. So tomorrow we'll talk to you a little bit more about small agile production plants. Here's an example of 3 from different manufacturers. And this is a technology that really is modular. You can decouple instrumentation, use your pumps elsewhere, put new reactors in order to address different reaction criteria. You can see clearly there's no one size fits all, but the technology is about temperature control, efficient mixing, and with a small whole volume, having a much safer production process. So we'd encourage you to come by our booth, make an appointment, or get in contact with us if you want to discuss where to start. We're really looking at defining commercial viability and working together to show where this technology can have impact. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions if you have time to take them.
Hello there. Yes, Charlotte, we do have actually got a question. Is a flow reactor suitable for gaseous monomer, for example, ethylene or propylene polymerizations? This could be solution or slurry.
Yep, so well, 2 different answers depending on solution or slurry. It's a very energetic process. There are some examples in the literature, so if the person wants to reach out to us after this, we can point them in the direction. There's some cases up to 10,000 tons per year looking at propylene oxide, ethylene oxide chemistries. So that's possible. Slurry gives a little bit more of a challenge if you're looking at high heat release and slurries, but there are a lot of technologies out there that can deal with actively mixing and can deal with that dynamic environment that's needed. So you wouldn't necessarily use our static reactors for the slurry, but there are continuous technologies that can be used, yes.
Okay, excellent. And we do have one more. Do you have a solution to efficiently discharge gaseous byproducts during the reaction?
Oh, this is not us as a solution, but there are solutions for that. When you're looking at the depressurization before you come to the outlet of your reactor, you would need a gas liquid separator. How you approach it is really dependent on the gas and the hazard associated with the gas, whether you directly scrub or you quench it. So process dependent, but there are techniques and companies that can give you solutions for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending. As Charlotte said, she is available to still take meetings on the platform. So please get in touch with her if you have any further questions. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.